Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to everybody's emergency. Welcome everybody to our emergency fraudcast. With the recent 700 credit breach announcement, there's been a lot of attention going on with what actually is happening and what do we need to be worried about? Who do we need to be mad at? What do we need to go do to sell cars tomorrow? So, as opposed to like some other companies out there who might have been involved in the breaking news, like saying, "Hey, well, if you buy my product, this wouldn't have happened." We're actually going to just talk real about like what are the things affecting this community as an industry, because this is not just about one bad actor or one mistake. This is a series of events that are all interconnected. And so what I've done is I've tried to bring some of the brightest minds in automotive compliance and fraud prevention together. And starting out with Terry Shebesta, CEO and founder of FlexPath. I've got Tom Kline from Better Vantage Point, author of Tuck the Octopus. Tracy Fox, Chief Revenue Officer of Botdoc.io, and my friend in the bow tie, Jim Ganther, from Mosaic Compliance Services. So we'll have a chance to briefly introduce what those companies do, but they all bring a different expertise to our industry that should inform, not necessarily additional comfort for you, but at least some real solutions on how we can work together going forward. So I'll start out ground rules. Nobody's here to sell you their individual product. I think we could make like a nice little solution sandwich for you out of everything. And we probably still aren't going to be able to address all the issues that lay out there in the industry. But what we do want to make sure you're aware of is the problems that we're really facing. Again, our knee-jerk reaction with all the news out there is let's go find somebody to be mad at and find somebody to blame and go punish them. And then that will prevent this from happening again. And the reality is the fraudsters are just eating the popcorn, waiting for that to happen. So instead, let's go get ahead of this and figure out what the end game is with this breach and what it means and how we're going to go work together to go fix it. So I'm going to start out with a quick pop quiz for my group. If you're watching in the audience, please feel free to comment with your answer. But we'll start out with pop quiz number one. All right. And this one's interesting because I think if it's happened somewhere, it's happened everywhere. So if 700 credit breach exposed 5.6 million records, how many automotive customer records have likely been compromised in the last couple of years? D, C. Okay. I'm just being conservative. All right. So I think on average, we said on average, 10 times that many have probably been exposed. And like, okay, think about that. How many cars have been sold the past couple of years, new and used? Like, it's a big number, right? I'd be willing to bet if there was an option E, 100 million. Some of y'all might have said 100. And the reality of the matter is, I'm going to get into it in just a minute and call on Tracy on kind of how he sees what happened and how he's going to compare that to CDK. So before we do that, I have another little numbers game for you. Of those 5.6 million, what percentage do you think will actually take, assuming we got notified, right? Of the 5.6 million, what percentage of them actually are going to take protective action like LifeLock, monitoring, or some kind of credit freeze? What percentage of people do you think actually do anything about it? All right. Okay. A. Okay. So we just said that, it says 5.6 million. It could be 50 to 100 million. But then the human behavior, we're so desensitized to these kinds of breaches that we've just been like, yeah, whatever. I'm not going to go take my time to sign up for LifeLock or freeze my credit. And that is, I think everybody would agree that's part of our issue, right? Like, what good does that do? Or are we essentially just checking a box, which is kind of an issue in and of itself while we're on this call. All right, so last question. And I bet Terry's going to have a good answer on this one. But of the 5.6 million exposed customers, what percentage would be like strong targets for fraud? Like they have 700 credit, or they have a 700 plus credit score, active trade line, no credit freezes. Like, which ones would be available to potentially get used to buy a car? All right, D. I swear I did not tell him to answer this. Okay, Tom gave me a different answer. Thank you, Tom. Keeping it real. So, I've heard 10 to 20% to over 20%. So what that means is if we had 5.6 million, we would all agree there's probably over 1 million available solid profiles that I could take and say, cool, I've gotten somebody's information, and now I'm going to go do my best to try and buy a car with a qualified buyer, right? So what does that mean? How many cars could that turn into? We always wonder, where are they getting these fake IDs, or where are these frauds happening? And we're all hearing about this problem in our industry. This is a great example of where it's coming from. So I think it's just fascinating that this one event is scaring everybody, but it's happening. My view would be, if it's happening here to a great company like, 700 Credit, by the way, I was on the board of 700 Credit for 2 years. They're a great company, and I think we've all probably had some conversations with them recently, and they're doing the right things and they're doing everything they can. If a dealer's willing to compromise their own passwords and allow perpetrators to go get on their systems to try to penetrate API endpoints, they're probably all vulnerable in some capacity, because the bad guys are doing their thing, right? They just need to get in the front door and they can take it from there. And so I'm trying to just help everybody understand what happens and what that means. So, I want to start out by talking to Tracy. Tracy, you are near and dear to, kind of what went down last summer, right? And could you just compare and contrast that, just because when people hear breach, like, it can be all different kinds of things. So talk to me about what that breach meant versus when we hear breach today.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, people just hear breach and they hear one word and their mind kind of goes. And I think it's ignorance in the industry. And I think the two main parts, though, Rudy, the two main segments to look at, and I'll talk kind of high level, and then I'll kind of bring it down and maybe simplify it for those folks that are listening that maybe don't understand this security thing. But I think it's number one was the attack type. So the attack type in the CDK was a ransom attack, and so they made it in through a phishing attack, etc. But they took control of the system, right? They're holding it hostage, whereas the 700 Credit, it was just unauthorized access to their system. And it came through an API purportedly earlier this year, back in May, I believe, is what they reported. And so when I look at this, I look at things, really kind of simplify them. I look at things in the security world as like a house. So if you look at this like a house, the way CDK came in, they came in as the burglar, right? The bad guy, the bad actor. They got into the house, they grabbed all your belongings, and they stayed in the house. And you don't know where they're at in the house. And you don't know what they're doing. And they could snip your electric lines and mess your plumbing up. They could do all sorts of crazy stuff. And it's like a moving target within your house, right? Inside the CDK system. But the 700 Credit breach is a little different. They came in as the bad actor. They got into the house and they took all the cash and the jewelry and from the house. And they bailed, right? They took off. And I think that where that then leads us is to my second point. What's the operational impact of each of those things? So in the CDK, huge operational impact, like major. They're holding the system ransom at this point. They're saying we want money. They're demanding probably a lot of things, but it is like literally you're paralyzed. And you can't do anything while this is taking place. But whereas the 700 Credit, there's really no impact operationally. Since they came in and they left the house, they're out of the house. Now they're out. There's no operational pieces. Again, you guys all remember that are listening, the CDK breach. We were down for 4 to 6 weeks. Dealerships were going back to paper and huge operational issues. Whereas 700 Credit, you're not going to see that kind of at the where the rubber meets the road operationally within your day-to-day business with 700. It's just now we have to deal with, okay, what does it look like to now with the records and the information that was stolen, the data that was taken? How do we address that, and how do we steward that process?
Right. Tom Kline, I know you'd also had some recent conversations. You want to just kind of share what you were able to glean from that as far as how to dimension this?
As far as what, Rudy?
As far as what just happened recently with the 700 Credit breach. I know you've kind of looked at this one back because you represent dealers, right? And you're kind of talking to vendors, that are impacted. So how have your conversations been going, and what did you take away from those conversations?
Yeah, I think as Tracy said, I think 700 Credit is doing an admirable job at trying to help the dealers. I spoke to them yesterday. They are responding on behalf of the dealers, both to the FBI, the Federal Trade Commission, and I know they're making their way through the state attorneys general offices, and that's a long, obviously, because they have 50 of those to do, and they're responding on behalf of the dealers. And so, that's, I think, for as far as the dealerships are concerned, knowing that they're taking those steps, I think is should give some comfort in this particular situation. As far as what a dealer should do.
Tom, I think you're breaking up. Okay. Tom, we lost you there for a minute. Apologies.
That's okay. Am I back now?
Yeah, you're back now. So as far I lost you with as far as what a dealer should be doing is what you're finishing up.
If you have cyber insurance, you should give your insurance carrier what's called a notice only, which means you're not putting in a claim, but you're giving them notice that there may be a claim down the road if one of your customers had a breach and they blame you and they're going to sue you and that kind of thing. Okay. If you don't have cyber insurance, let this be a wake-up call. And I still run into dealerships that don't have cyber insurance. I also run into dealerships that don't have enough cyber insurance. So let me just spend 30 seconds or so on that. Imagine, take the number of files in your TMS and imagine that you had to pay for credit monitoring for every one of those files, right? In the let's say you have 265,000 files. I believe, unless you're buying it, maybe you get a discount when you're buying in bulk. But to my knowledge, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, it's about $100 per user per year. So if you had to pay for all 265,000, I think that's, what is that, 225 million, right? That's $25 million, right? Not everybody's going to sign up, of course, but take a look at your cyber limits. Also use this time to see what's covered and what's not. If you want to start with what to do there, read through your exclusions and see what's not covered, and then see if you can get it covered. So those would be the first steps that I would take.
Great. So one of the things I heard Tracy say was, there's not a very clear chain of custody of like what, if they got 5.6 million records, what dealers did it come from, right? It didn't come specifically from dealers. So it's like, okay, well, if a consumer was looking at a car at 10 different dealerships and they, a bunch of them were on 700 credit, like who's in the chain, right? And so it reminds me of that whole, and Tracy deals with encrypted messages. So I'll kind of like use that logic is, if a message is traveling unencrypted, Tracy, you've trained me on this. If it's traveled unencrypted, even if somebody didn't grab it, you have to assume that it got grabbed, right? That's kind of the way like integrations and secure integrations work nowadays. And so I look at that in the same fashion. And so how, and Jim Ganther with the bow tie, I'm going to ask Jim a quick pop quiz question for him. Like, how do you interpret that? Like, okay, if there's a possibility that it could have been your client, right? But we're not 100% sure because we don't have data on where else they've shopped at. Like, what's the default on how to behave? So I'm curious what your opinion is on that.
Well, the default is, where there's an injury, there is a recovery, there is a remedy, and there's a particular set of facts that we're dealing with here that point the liability to the dealer. So I could say if a consumer shopped 3 local dealerships on the same weekend for the same make and model of car and had a soft pull run on them through 700 Credit, I would say all 3 of those dealerships could be jointly and severally liable. But the fact that it's a dealership, plaintiff's lawyers are going to be asking for a jury. Dealers are going to be assumed to be the bad actor. But here's the thing that I haven't heard anybody talk about yet. Out of the 5.6 million people who ran through 700 Credit from May to October, how many of them knew that their credit was being pulled?
Okay.
Because it could have been a soft pull. And if you find out by a letter in the mail that somebody pulled my credit without my knowledge or consent, even if it is strictly legal, because it's not necessarily illegal, because soft pulls are not being used in the credit decision. If you go forward, then you do a hard pull, but they're functionally identical. If you didn't buy a car, if you didn't apply for credit and you found out your identity got stolen because that dealership ran your credit without your knowledge and consent, man, that it just looks bad. And
right.
the thing that I think we could see happening in 2026 is if this blows up badly enough, you're going to see regulatory pushback such that the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which kind of governs this, the consent issue, that was written about anti-discrimination. It wasn't written about data security.
Right.
And I think that loophole could be tied, and such that you can't even do a soft pull without express consent and knowledge. And that could really harm the business models of 700 Credit, Informative, and other companies that sell the soft pull. We'll see what happens, but I think that's the unintended consequence.
Well, I will bring us out of the pit of despair just briefly to say, hey, by the way, CFPB has been kind of neutered compared to last year, so that's good, right? It's a little bit, it's probably not as onerous of a response as it could have been, right? Had they been well funded, but now what that means is the individual states are going to come over and try to drop the hammer. So, where you have a little bit of a false sense of security, like, oh, well, Trump's in office, it's not as big of a deal. Well, like, actually, no, now you got 50 times as many problems to comply with, right?
Real quick to chime in there, in Bloomberg Law, there was an article in September that said that the FTC was stepping in where they saw a lack of enforcement because of the CFPB. So we'll see how that goes. And also remember, Rudy, that in the last 3 or 4 months, the FTC published new guidelines for the GLBA, and I know Jim wants to speak to this. There's FAQ for the car dealers on the FTC website now regarding GLBA. So they didn't just put that stuff out there to not want to go and enforce it.
Yeah. Just I'll take a data point for Weston behind the curtain. If we could make sure we get that and broadcast that link, that would be amazing. So we were talking about prequal. So kind of where I was going with this is, what's the first point of entry? So you say they got 1 million good credit profiles from this last breach. What's the first thing they're going to go try to do? Like, how would they go even figure out who can buy and who can't buy? And so I wanted to kind of tee it up over to Terry Shebesta, who's kind of like our resident prequal expert. He does have a company that sells prequal, so full disclosure, but he's done a great job educating me on the risks. And if you were on a previous Fraudcast, Terry and I kind of talked about the concept of, like, holy crap, that the dealers' websites themselves are becoming fraud incubators, right? So let's talk about, like, say I got all 1 million of that. If I'm one bad guy and I got all those records, right? What would I be doing with those records to go figure out who can buy a car or not?
Yeah. Wow. So here we go. That's a scary point because and relate to what Jim was saying about the prequal. The consumer does have to opt in, right? They're supposed to opt in, but that doesn't mean that particular consumer is really that consumer, right? I can take, and we saw this earlier this year, and we put out a public service announcement about this. And this is, I think, the other shoe that's about to drop, right? And we'll see how this goes in the next month or so. But what's happened, and what Rudy's referring to, is we saw where, and by the way, I'm a dealer, I'm a lender. So I have a lot of insight on all sides of this because it affects me directly. But what we found was some of these dealers that are using these prequal, the 5-liners that is everybody likes to talk about out there. We call those legacy prequal forms, where you put the name and address, phone number, email. Okay? Anybody can do that. And then what happens is okay, once they put that information in, they're like, okay, is that customer prequal? And if it comes back, whether it's an automated pre-qual, the dealer calls them and says, oh, by the way, Rudy, you're pre-qualified. Unfortunately, that response is going back to the fake input of that name and address, the fraudulent input. And we saw this in the middle of the night. Within 2 minutes, a dealer was hit with a couple of hundred pre-qual requests, name, address. These are real people they were entering in, but it was in the middle of the night, and I had insight. I was notified by a few dealers it happened to that I'm actually aware of. But what's happening, and we mentioned the fraud incubator, those come back whether they're pre-qualified. And if it comes back, whether it's instantaneous or the dealer calls Rudy and says, hey, Rudy, you're pre-qualified. Well, they're not really calling Rudy per se, right? They're calling the fraud piece of this. And it could be a fake phone number that's put in there. Anyway, once that information comes back as Rudy's pre-qualified, now those fraudsters can take Rudy's information and go buy whatever they want, knowing that Rudy's pre-qualified. That's where the term that Rudy coined, fraud incubators. And it's absolutely happening right now. It's happening. We don't even know the scope. The dealers don't know the scope. And the other problem with this is that the dealers are being charged for fraudulent pre-qualification fees, right? These pre-qual fees are going to be adding up to thousands and thousands. And one last point, we know at Auto Finance Summit that the lenders were talking about their defaults. And in the past, the defaults on loans were based upon customer just didn't want to pay, couldn't pay, whatever it was. Well, now it could be 20 to 30% of these defaults could be related to fraud. And some of the lenders are starting to talk about that now. We don't know the percentages, the real percentages, but here's the last percentage I'll leave with you. Another percent of website traffic, dealer website traffic, could be 30% fraudulent or bad actors trying to seek out, how can I get a car? And we're exposing these legacy pre-qual web apps. They're a problem, a big problem, and it's happening right now.
So there's several other things that have to happen that of negligence in order for them to actually get away with the fraud, right? That we've had Fraudcasts on already, but this is basically saying we're making it a much easier gateway and giving them much more velocity, because I think the fact that we're actually helping the fraudsters figure out who to use it's not funny, but it's interesting. Just real quick. So I'm going to call in Jim one more time. So Jim, going back to just to remind everybody, if I finance a car and I'm typically a non-recourse dealer with a bank and the bank finds fraud existed, what happens typically, or what should happen per the dealer?
Every set of facts is different, but what could happen is one of the representations in every lender agreement I've ever seen is the dealers have to agree that they're going to follow all applicable laws, right? And if you're not following the law, even if it's non-recourse paper, it's recourse paper. And One of those laws is the FTC safeguards rule. And the safeguards rule not only requires you to have an information security program, your own written information security program, multi-factor authentication, endpoint detection and response, training, all of those requirements. But the one that implicates us here is, are you overseeing your service providers? And that means if you're a dealer, what steps did you take to make sure that 700Credit was going to take care of your customers' non-public personal information? And did you document those steps? This isn't a statute of strict liability. I mean, if something goes wrong, it doesn't mean you are absolutely going to get sued, but you had to do your part. So if there are 52 jurisdictions, all 50 states, District of Columbia, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, they all have laws that deal with notification of breach. And 11 of those jurisdictions, including California, as you would expect, have a private cause of action. So if you weren't following the safeguards rule, if you did not qualify 700 Credit as being a responsible vendor who you can trust, you may have a very big problem. And here's the problem today. 700 Credit, I don't disagree with you, Rudy. Great company, built a great operation, but they've just demonstrated they didn't take care of customer data. So where does that put the dealer right now? You now have evidence that they weren't good. Now you need evidence that whatever the heck went wrong, they have fixed. Yeah. And they have to give you that documentation. And if they don't, if you read that rule strictly, and I do, you're at risk even using 700 Credit. Think about that. So I'm assuming 700 Credit is working very, very quickly to fix their problem, document the fix, and push that data back to the dealerships, because until they do, dealerships have a much heightened risk liability.
Rudy, let me just go ahead, because I know we're getting close to time, but what Jim is saying is actually correct about the rules. Well, the problem we're having is all of the new fraud that we're finding out there. There's no rules for that. The rules, Jim, need to be updated almost like they need to be looked at nonstop, because what the information I have and what we're seeing, there's going to needs to be new rules for verifying that the customer that actually is applying for a pre-qualification under a soft pull is that customer, right? And it's not CAPTCHA and all of that, because that's what they try to do on this legacy pre-qual that we're talking about. They try to install CAPTCHA. That does not prevent fraud. OTP is something that we've seen works very well in the marketplace. But again, it's not one solution. And Rudy, I'm not going to get on the fraud stack, but one solution doesn't solve everything.
Right. Well, that's a great point, Jim. I had not thought of it that way. So we'll probably have to do another call for that. So let me pivot real quick. I've got another poll question just to take a breath real quick. So next poll question, kind of if we had to guess, like, and actually I don't think this is all going to be the same answer. Where do you think like dealerships are the most vulnerable? Like, we've talked specifically about a real critical area, but this could touch lots of different things. Like, if y'all and I'd be willing to bet, I'm trying to get 4 different answers. We'll see. But where do you think the dealership's the most vulnerable in all of this, in either helping, allowing fraud to happen, or putting dealers at risk for FTC, or putting them, again, these are 3 different types of risks. There's dealer loss, there's kind of federal loss, and then there's, like, I would call it lawyer loss. You have to go spend a lot of money on lawyers, and guys
say that like it's a bad
guys with bow ties. So I'm curious what the group said. Okay, I got 3 folks said employee behavior, and 1 said F&I workflows. Okay, so I would just go with the majority, and I'm looking on the public comments as well. I see a lot around employee behavior. So I'm gonna go ask one more question on top of that. Okay, so we just said it's primarily employee behavior. Next poll question would be, how many vendors on average per dealership are touching personally identifiable information like what got breached? And I think that's getting ready to pop up. So 3 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, or 15 plus. I like Tom's. Tom is creating new answers. I'm not getting alphas. I'm getting numeric. That's good. Okay. So I like Terry gave me the most aspirational answer, which was only 5 to 10. Having been an employee at Reynolds and kind of working on the vendor consolidation plan over the years, I would say on average, I think this was in 2009, right after 09. I think it was on the average was like 17. So I'm sure that number's higher. I actually have not double clicked that stat. And so I think we just said, okay, our biggest issue is the employees. And I don't want to say it's bad employees. I'm going to say it's bad training, and I'm going to say it's bad enforcement and not enforcement of the process. And apologies if I hurt any feelings there, but I'm just saying that from where my seat is. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But now, okay, you've got that challenge, and now you're also asking them to juggle over 15 vendors, right? So is the problem we have an employee issue, or do we have too many vendors, or is it a combination of things? And I don't necessarily have the solution for you. I'm just saying, like, this is how we got here, right? And so, so with that, I do want to call on Tracy really quick. Tracy's got an interesting insight on just like the basic ways that information is transferred between the consumer and the dealer. So Tracy, just talk about, like, you know, there's typically, like, I'm guessing there's 5 methods, right? You got email, MMS, shared links, portal upload, or secure transfer. So, like, give me the flavor of where everybody's at and where they should be, just from your perspective.
Yeah, no, great question. I think that, going back to this question, and you and I have chatted about this. You can walk into a dealership and within 5 minutes know whether the top-down leadership is aligned properly.
Yep.
And it's not the prisoners running the asylum. So my encouraging word to all the dealerships would be get your leadership in order to align, right? So that trickles down, and that your employees, right, the sales associates, the F&I, and all these folks are actually doing what you're saying. Because if they don't follow it and there's not employee buy-in and compliance, yeah, you're going to have, and that bridges well to the question you're asking, which is, of the 16 safeguard rules, right, the FTC safeguards that took effect on June 9th of 2023, there is one there that's it's number 4. We numbered them, so I don't think they're numbered as they release them, but we look at it as number 4 as they listed them. But it's encrypted data. It's encrypted data at rest and encrypted data in transit. Well, the encrypted data at rest is more of an oversight thing, right? It's your security team making sure that all of your local, your desktops and your cloud and everything else, all that data is encrypted at rest. But then there's this thing encrypted in transit, and everyone's like, well, what does that mean? So in layman terms, how are you getting stuff to and from other people outside of your dealership? How are you getting things from your customers? How are you getting things from the bank? How are you getting things from the 700Credit even, right? And there could be API connections. There could be a lot of things internally that do that. But the main one is that like you said, email, SMS, right? Shared links, all these things. So going back to the original question that you asked me, Rudy, how did CDK get breached? I mean, that was a phishing link. It was an email, right? And it opened up a ransomware attack that shut things down, right? So again, that goes back. I could go down 100 rabbit holes. That's why I'm kind of stuttering almost, because this is such a loaded question. So right. Even in the CDK attack, one would have been, hey, did we set things in place to train our employees about phishing attacks? Right. And there's technology out there to do this stuff, right? Hey, they'll send 1 email a month or 2 or 3, and you have to train. And again, it's education. Now, I know that this industry, the auto industry, has not been regulated ever before with regards to the security of data, but other regulated industries have, and we've been working in regulated industries for a long time, so we get this stuff. Again, there's an education process. So think about healthcare. I was in healthcare for years. Back in '96, when the HIPAA came around, right, when it came to being, they enforced it. I say there's 3 stages. One is denial. It's not going to happen. It's going to go away. It's not going to whatever, right? Then after it settles in and the facts settle in and they're like, okay, it's not going away. That's number 2. And then number 3 is, okay, we actually have to do something about it. So again, I think we're 2.5 years into this thing, roughly. 2.5. I call it a 5-year window usually. If you look at a lot of the regulated industries, at about the 4, 5, 6 year mark, they're going to make an example of someone. The FTC will. Even with the calls that they're getting right now, I'm sure they're ignoring a bunch of them, and that's usually where they come from, a disgruntled employee or a disgruntled customer, right? But at the end of the day, right, we're in that middle stage where everyone's making decisions and implementing and executing. And so make sure that these things are put in place. Some of them are checkboxes. Some of them are a list of, hey, we got to make sure these things are in order. We got to make sure that our third-party vendors and that all of their stuff is secured and we're getting the due diligence. And there's a whole list of those things. So if you're a smaller dealership and you can't afford to have that in-house, I encourage you to hire a fractional CISO of some sort, Chief Information and Security Officer, to make sure they're oversighting your stuff, first and foremost. Secondly, then, going back to the one piece of all 16, and this is kind of our business, and it's not a plug for me, but we're dealing with that encrypted data in transit. How are you getting things to and from the consumer? It's the only one of the 16, though, that require buy-in and actual participation from the employees of the dealership, whether it's F&I, whether it's a sales associate, desking manager, GSM, doesn't matter. They actually have to participate and make sure that they're not using their text, their email, even texting and emailing out of the CRM and is not compliant. So they have to make sure that they're doing these things compliantly. Again, I could go down, Rudy, a million different rabbit holes here, but that's really the framework for some of this stuff. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of technologies out there. It really comes down to, okay, what's efficient, what works well, because they should be secure by design, but what works well and what makes it most efficient for our workflow processes, and that sales cycle at the dealership of the vehicle.
Right. So I think, so we, and again, we're going to have a couple more group questions. I want to make sure all my panelists have had appropriate amount of time and had the floor to kind of get their points across. But what I hear is like there's lots of different areas we need to be putting effort in. And I would pose the question this way, and I'm going to ask Jim and Tom this question. So let's say I get all the notes from this call and I've covered all the bases, right? And I've kind of like figured out, okay, here's all the right things I should be doing, right? And then so I go make best effort, I think, to use Jim's word, to go protect and secure and all those things. I think we also have to just accept the fact that the possibility exists that something still could happen, right? There's no absolute, but I think the whole concept of best effort is important as opposed to just not doing anything and being ignorant. And I think that's a differentiator from an audit perspective. So I guess my question would be like, when an audit happens, I guess like put your auditor hat on. Of course, if any of y'all were auditors, I would not probably be friends with you, just so you know. If you were, right, and you were looking at a dealer that implemented the right things, like from a confidence level, like how confident would you be that a dealer would pass an audit versus not confident at all versus I hope they don't show up because, I hope the dealer better hope I don't show up or they're screwed. Like, I'm just trying to assess like how much effort is best effort, just in as brief a way you could state, because I think everybody wants to know like how much work is this going to be for me? I have a full-time job. I have sell cars, right?
Well, I'm going to jump in with something that I think is absolutely true for every dealer that is using 700 credit. The safeguards rule has a requirement that your WISP, your written information security program, be reviewed and updated periodically, but it doesn't tell you what that period is. Best practice, I always say look at it every year, but when updated is when you've had an event. And so what I would look for if I were a state auditor at a dealership is, given that you're a 700 credit dealership client and given they lost your customers' data, show me the documentation that you reviewed what went wrong and what you're changing going forward. That has to be documented. It has to be done this week. I mean, that is non-negotiable. That is action item number one. I will pause. Maybe, I don't know, let Tom say something.
So I just want to capture that. All right. Action item. Go review your WISP right now.
Right now.
Okay. Got it. All right. I think we all have our own WISPs as companies. We need to do that as well. I think we reviewed ours last week, actually. So it's good timing. Tom?
Yeah. So I've got 4 points on this. Number one, Ken Hill, the managing director of 700 Credit, said yesterday that they have 200 partners that they have APIs with, and this was the result of one of 200 partners. So I think if if any regulator came in and said, what did you do to make sure this wouldn't happen again? I think it's easy to make the argument to say, look, it doesn't matter whether I use 700 Credit or one of their competitors. This came in not through 700 Credit. And you can easily, I think you could make the argument to say, look, everybody's going to have this problem. There's no vendor I can choose that won't have the problem. So that's number one. Number two, going back to what Jim said earlier, if you have a lender who comes back to you and says that they were defrauded, and as a result, you have to buy the contract back, whether it's recourse or repurchase, I'll set that aside for another time. You may have an insurance claim under your insurance policy, depending on the facts of that matter. So do check your insurance if that ever is an eventuality. Number three, to answer the question you just asked, the GLBA says that your policies and procedures need to be based on the size and scope of your operation. And I think that's a good way to answer any regulatory question, like how much should you do? It should be based on the size and scope of your operation. But you need to be able to tell a story about what your compliance efforts are regardless. You should be able and be prepared to sit down when anybody walks in off the street and says, they show you their badge, show you their credentials. You say, come on in, have a seat. Let me tell you everything we're doing here for compliance. And if you can't do that based on the size and scope of your operation, I think that's a mistake. So you should use the prudent man rule as to, what is appropriate for size and scope. And that's point number three. And point number four is, I think, and I see this mistake over and over, I think dealers need to change their thinking on probability-based thinking, like what are the chances this is going to happen to me, to an impact-based thinking, which is, if this does happen to me, how am I going to react? How as an organization are we prepared to react? And this does take time, and it takes thought in how you're going to respond. So, just wanted to get those points in.
No, great points. So
let me bounce back to point number three that you made, Tom, about the appropriate for the size and the scope of the dealership. Dealership sizes vary from dirt lot to publicly traded, but the scope is the same, because the scope that really has us all here today is the consumer non-public personal information, specifically that which is contained in a consumer report. That particular scope is nuclear. That's not like just losing your name and your address. It is all the stuff. If you have the contents of a credit bureau, you don't have the tools to steal an identity. You've stolen an identity. It's just a question of what you do with it. So hammering on the point of what is appropriate based on your size, given that the scope is uniform, is there are certain things that everybody should do, even if they're doing 10 cars a month. And employee training, really high. Written policy procedure, that's required by law. It is non-negotiable. The safeguards that you employ, I want the auditor, the investigator to sit down in my office and say, here is our endpoint detection and response. Here is our multi-factor authentication. To Terry's point, or excuse me, to Tracy's point, here's our end-to-end encryption in transit and at rest. Here's our security awareness training. And here's the documentation of every review we have done internally since not 2023, since 2003, since May 23rd, 2003. It was updated 2 years ago, but the safeguards rule has been in place since May of 2003. And I don't know of a single dealer who's got 22 years worth of documentation, but good on them if they do, because it is required. And certainly have some documentation with ink that is still wet. This is what we did as soon as we heard about the 700 credit breach. Here's how we fixed it. Here's how we documented it.
Right. Good. Excellent point, Jim. All All right, so we're coming to the end of our call. We're running a little over on time. So I did have one last poll for this group, and then we'll do a poll for the audience. So just shoot me straight. When's the next breach going to hit?
Yesterday.
So I think Weston's popping it up, but when do y'all think it's going to hit?
Any minute.
It's now. It's
already
happening.
happened.
It's happening right now.
I'm just changing my. I'm not letting Tom give me my multiple choice questions anymore. Y'all are redefining. Okay.
It's happening right now.
Lowest possible number. It's happening as we speak.
It depends, Rudy.
Man, some fraud Grinches here. I tell you what. Okay, so I guess tell me real quick, and just you can put it in the chat or you can just call it out. Like, we've covered a bunch of different risks, and we're trying to help dealers kind of dimension how to go address those risks, right, and be prepared for them because it's coming. What are any other risks that the industry is continuing to ignore around this topic that we need to just bring up before we conclude? And I think we've hit the big ones. Terry, you had one?
Yeah. Well, so again, the thing that's happening right now is the legacy pre-qual apps. We've talked about it, and I know, Rudy, you said the dealers are like I'm selling cars. I don't even know what to do or how to do it, or right. I'm too busy to do anything. So I'm throwing out there. We're willing to give a free review of your pre-qual process. We've got an email set up just for this. It's pre-qual review at flexpathdxp.com. No obligation. We'll look at it. Won't take long. We'll give you exactly what either you're exposed or you're not. You're fine. We're happy to do that. And we've got the experience to do that. So,
gotcha. Any others?
The
Tom?
echo of any massive data breach. The echo is going to be the synthetic identities that are going to walk into dealerships from those 5.6 million records. Some substantial portion of them are going to hit the streets as synthetic identities trying to steal a car. So you got to be aware of the red flags rule as the echo of the violation of the safeguards rule.
Totally agree. Nobody is immune in this situation from a hack. I'm sure that there are thousands of systems around the globe right now with someone hanging out inside of somebody's system, some bad actor, just collecting all the information and figuring out what their next step is or what their next move is. Absolutely. And it doesn't matter whether you're a single point store, to your point, Jim, or a dirt lot, or you're a public. They're hitting them all. It doesn't matter who or what. They're no respecter of dealership. And to your point, Rudy, and I think someone just brought it up, the deep fake world is, AI is really rampant. So at like dealer level right now, I spoke at it's a financial fraud consortium is what it's called. I spoke at it last fall, and or maybe in the spring, but I did an entire speaking session on it. The AI now, even since then, AI has gotten so much more robust. I mean, whether it's a voice, a face, I mean, it's just like every dealership should be verifying biometrically face, maybe definitely IDs, right? Verifying those, and then going to that DMV, right? And the red flag and all the other appropriate steps to make sure that you know who it is that you're talking to on the other side, especially with remote sales.
Right. Yeah. And I like to talk about the fact that, one of the things my company focuses is like we verify humanity. Right.
Yeah.
So that's hard to do with tech. Tom, you had one other thing, I think, talking about in general about kind of the crisis plan.
Yeah. I mean, I when I started my consulting business after being a dealer, I sat down. It took me about 6 to 9 months to come up with a 48-page document of what all the things that dealers are supposed to comply with, right? I know Jim has one as well. And the fact of the matter is there are so many things, there are so many problems. So what I would encourage a dealer to do is triage what you believe could be an enterprise-ending event, whatever that might be. It could be a breach. It could be an auto accident. It could be a lot of different things. And then, do you have the insurance to back to be able to rely on for that? Are your limits enough? Have you looked at the exclusion? So typically not everybody's like this, but the insurance brokers run in 3 days before and go, good news, your increase this year is only 22%, and they give the thumbs up, and the dealer doesn't have time to examine the actual forms and what they're buying. They're just looking at a number, and they're reacting to a number instead of reacting to the form. So do you have that insurance component handled to make sure that you're covered? And that's an ongoing thing, right? I mean, the first thing that a dealer should have done when he heard about this is, do I have insurance to cover it if somebody makes a claim on me? So asking those types of risk questions, I really think is important in terms of protecting the assets of the dealership.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to do kind of a final reality check poll for the audience, all the people that are listening. I hope everybody participates. And this one will be curious. Do you think your dealership has already been part of a breach? Yes, probably, maybe, no. So I'll be curious to see. And I think the answers would dictate, okay, most likely what we're going to see from the audience is, okay, after listening to this call, it's probably going to be a B at a minimum, if not an A. Whether or not they're a 700 credit customer. And that's really the message that I've been trying to drive, is that, like, we're all in the game, like vendors and dealers. And again, it's about, the end game is crooks are trying to steal cars. They're stealing identities, and then they're figuring out where we have vulnerabilities, and they're looking for breaks in the process, a lot of times around employees, where there's handoffs and where there's misalignment. And then ultimately they win when they get a car off the lot that they didn't have to pay for. So we're all here to help. I think we're going to put out some follow-up items on, hey, check your WESP, check your insurance, check your pre-qual, check your secure document transfer policies. What's your process on fraud prevention? Obviously, kind of some of the things that Mav does, and we'll be sharing that out with the group. So hopefully everybody enjoyed this fraud action committee. I appreciate everybody getting on short notice, but I didn't want to let it go through the weekend and we're selling cars and we're starting our Christmas sales and all that without trying to give some insight and knowledge that might help dealers protect themselves better. So with that, I'm going to close. Again, thank you to my panel. Very much appreciate it. Security is an ecosystem issue, folks. So awareness isn't protection. Taking action is. So hopefully everybody can learn something from this and take at least one thing and do something different to move forward and help your dealership. So thank you all, and be a maverick, and we'll talk to you on the next broadcast in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Rudy.
Thanks, Rudy.
Thanks, Rudy.